Yeah.
We begin chapter 6 today, if you're following along in the book. Maybe the clearest, least clever of the titles for the chapters. This one simply, Love Will Not Sustain Your Marriage. No interesting illustrations, metaphors, just straight up. But it wants to talk about the fact that making a marriage go takes more than romantic love. What's the best way to find a spouse? Too bad I don't have the
Not Match, not Match.
Caleb here, but what is the best way to find a spouse?
I have something to say about number one.
Can I read the list?
Oh,
And then we'll let you comment. So I'm just going to go through the list quick, and then Diane is going to take the class over. Let your parents arrange your marriage. Number 2, use a professional matchmaker. Hello, Dolly. Get set up by friends. For the internet, Match.com, eHarmony, FarmersOnly.com. You know, they've got that for every little subgroup. Attend church functions, attend bars, clubs, concerts, parties, etc. Pray for God to send you the one. Find someone while attending high school or college, or become a contestant on The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, 90 Day Fiance, or some other TV show that purports to get that arranged for you. All right, so Diane, let your parents arrange your marriage. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I worked with 2 people who had arranged marriages, and I said, "How's that work for you?" And they say, "Better than the ones you pick for yourself."
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Wow, that's interesting.
Because it's just this is what it is. You have to do it. You just do it.
Well, your
I think
parents know
Rachel's-
you,
Yeah.
and your parents are not going to pick someone bad for you.
Most parents.
Yeah.
So that's historically how many cultures have done it. And in those that still do that today, their marriages, on average, do last longer than our system, which has been in place for 150 years or so, where you do the whole date ship and courting thing and try to find it on your own. You may still go to dad on you still as a potential groom go to the bride's father and ask for her hand and that kind of thing. But the cultures where that's the case tend to be way ahead in terms of longevity for the marriage. Now, that being said, doesn't always mean that they're happy. It does mean that they have a different expectation of marriage in many cases. And it doesn't mean that they're not happy either.
Well, where does it say you have to be happy?
It doesn't say that anywhere, but that is the expectation I think
It's
that many
the
people
American
have.
thing. That's the American thing.
Yeah, and kind of American/Western culture. A lot of what we have comes out of the whole chivalry of Western Europe. It goes back to the Middle Ages, and while especially in the upper classes, marriages were still arranged in that setting. There was the whole romantic ideal that was being put in place through that time. Nobody shoots for unhappiness.
No.
That's nobody's goal. Let's get married and make each other miserable for the next 50 years. There might be some people like that, but they have other problems.
Did
But-
the kings get to choose their bride? Like David's?
So if you're the top of the top, more so. So we'll talk moment biblically. I'm going to take a quick walk through some of the primary biblical characters with whom we're familiar. But so King Henry VIII, for example. When you're the king, there is nobody above you to arrange your marriage any longer, and so you're setting it up yourself. And of course, Henry VIII in England had trouble because he wanted a male heir. That was really what he wanted out of his marriages, and his brides were not providing that. So in a time before divorce was a thing, some of them just went to the guillotine or had their heads cut off instead. He disposed of them and got a new one, trumped up charges. And eventually he took the Church of England out of the Catholic Church because the Pope wouldn't give him an annulment or a divorce when he wanted one. So at that level, if you're the king, you got nobody at top telling you what to do. You pretty much do what you like, right? Very often. Professional matchmakers, they're still around. If you've ever seen the movie Hello Dolly or the musical Hello Dolly, that the theme of that, Dolly Levi, and that is a professional matchmaker. She's been hired by Horace Vandergelder to get him a suitable wife in late 1800s New York or something. When I fly, if you have the magazine, United Airlines or American Airlines in the pocket ahead of you has their own company magazine, something to pass the time while you're getting to your destination. And there's usually several advertisements, commercials in there for high-end matchmakers. And they advertise it. If you're at this kind of income level, then you can join our club and we'll set you up with somebody else who's at this income level and we'll match you up appropriately. But I mean, somehow or another, you have to meet somebody. And take your pick as to where you meet them and how you meet them, but somebody has to link up. So nothing wrong with that. Get set up by friends. I know a number of people. In the church I grew up in, the pastor's wife was sort of the unofficial matchmaker in the congregation. She would have a dinner party and invite 2 single people and a few others, right? But she would seat them next to each other at the dinner party, make sure they met, and she got a number of them going that way. The internet, I know now a number of people who are happily married after having met at one of these dating type websites. Not Farmers Only. I just see the commercial there, and it struck me when I first saw that it was something so specific. But you do see other similar specific match sites for people who are of a same persuasion in one way or another. There's a Well Singles group that's on the internet if you want to make sure you've met somebody who shares your specific version of Christianity. So they're out there. Some people are looking at church. We're not going to attract people here that much that way because there's just very few opportunities. A little congregation like ours, 6 is the way a lot of people go, and not all those have to be terrible. My mom and dad met at my dad's cousin's birthday party when my dad was about 21 or 22. I think my mom was 18, 19. So that can work. It worked for them. They're celebrating, they just went past 60 years, right? Yeah. Prayer, it's good for all of the above. But if you're just going to sit on your hands at home, you can still do it. Maybe God will send someone to your front door. That's less likely. Find someone attending high school, college. A lot of us may be that way. I won't get up in my soapbox about the last one there too much, but I don't think this should be a competitive sport. I don't see that as being a good thing at all. And if you don't have drama going on, you don't have a TV show. So you know that the producers and the people working behind the scenes, behind the cameras, are half looking to sabotage half of what goes on. They need to find somebody who belongs in the asylum to be on the show, so that person can do their dirty work, so that you have a TV show. Not to be recommended. All right. So how do the following biblical characters? How did they find their spouses? Any lessons for us? So Adam.
That was easy.
Here you go.
Okay. So what I said
Here's your
about
ring.
prayer, you can't just sit at home. But in Adam's case,
Yep.
God pretty much just had Eve show up at the door. There she is. Okay, here we go. Did it work?
Yes.
Would appear so.
But he was missing a rib for the rest of his life.
Well, yeah. Dating and marriage, that's not inexpensive.
tell you.
And it came with no guarantees, obviously.
Came with- yeah. There wasn't a whole lot of alternatives though, right? Adam couldn't say, well, you know, there's more fish in the sea. Not for him. Not for him. Abraham. What do you know about Abraham and Sarah?
She was related, it was family.
Half sister. Yeah, that seems bad to us, but you know the question is, well, how did the early peoples find spouses and populate? Or right after Noah, how did they find spouses and populate? Well, it had to be pretty close family.
Yeah.
And at a point in time at which perhaps the gene pool was a little cleaner, hadn't disintegrated because of sin quite so far, maybe didn't have some of the genetic problems, and thus God had not put into people the same, what do you want to call it?
Abhorrence.
Abhorrence, that feeling that's, you know, something's incestuous, and that kind of grew. By the time you get to the Law of Moses, well, then the Law of Moses makes clear that those kind of first level relationships, side to side, up and down, were off limits. Lutheran theologians of about a generation or two ago had some back and forth about whether first cousins were off limits or not. And you may know that that's state by state in our country. In some places you can marry someone as close as your first cousin. Some places will require that you be of such an age that you're no longer of childbearing age because they are concerned about genetic issues. And for some people, there would be an ick factor with that. But you know, the New Testament says no brothers or sisters, half brothers or sisters, parents, uncles, aunts, you know, those kind of first level relationships. Isaac.
Abraham sent his servant back to where he was from, and Rebecca was the sister of Laban.
All right. So in Isaac's case, you do have somebody who is a little more distant relative, kind of a second cousin. And you also have the parental involvement in arranging it. It turned out okay.
Yes.
They seemed to get along with each other. They were horrible parents. One favored one son, one favored the other son. There was all sorts of family plotting going on behind the
they
scenes.
were dysfunctional.
Yeah,
Yes.
pretty dysfunctional in the way they treated their twin sons. Jacob.
He had to leave because his brother wanted to kill him, so he went back. Right, he went back home, right?
So he goes back to where his mom's side of the family was from, ends up at Uncle Laban, right? Uncle Laban's house. Falls in love with Rachel. Laban pulls a switcheroo on the wedding night. I think for most of us, if we're still curious when we get to heaven, we can ask what was wrong there. It would seem like that's something you would have figured out, but it is what it is. And then ends up in a polygamous marriage. So he's kind of the one there that really arranged things for himself in a large way. He did the dealing with Uncle Laban about this many years to take care of dowry and all that. How did that turn out? So you know how these sister wives got along or didn't. And you know that a lot of that dysfunction got passed along to the next generation, just as his parents had shown a lot of favoritism with him, so he treated his own sons in a very uneven, favoritistic kind of way. Not so good when he was just thrown out there on his own, and he thought he was clever. Jacob was the trickster, the wrestler. He thought he was clever. And at every turn, God showed him, you're not so smart as you think, buddy. And let him suffer the consequences. Joseph.
Yeah, he was Egyptian.
So, who did Joseph marry?
Egyptian.
An Egyptian lady. Arranged by
Pharaoh.
the boss. Generally speaking, that's not one we would say, I'm going to go to work and I'll work under this manager and I'll let my manager pick. But it was something of a political marriage. And so far as we know, there was no big issues with it. It seems to have worked fine. And you would have had cultural differences. You would have had faith differences. There might have been something of a language barrier. But they seem to have made it work. So arranged from the outside. Moses.
Son of a chap. Hey, I'm there.
Wasn't it the boss, is Jethro's daughter?
Yeah.
Yes.
So a little bit of, again, he went to work for Jethro as a shepherd and married one of the boss's daughters. And seems to have mostly worked out. We know of a few little incidences where they got in a little bit of a tussle. You may remember the incident as they're heading from the Red Sea to Sinai. Apparently his wife had objected to his sons being circumcised. And God said, this is not an option if you're going to be part of my Jewish people. So the sons will be circumcised or Moses will die. Take your pick. So his wife actually performed the surgery and somewhat angrily said to Moses, well, you've become to me a bridegroom of blood. She was not happy about the fact, for whatever reason. But other than that little tiff, everybody's going to have something like that in their life somewhere along the way. It seems that they got along fine. Boaz.
So Jethro they were not Hebrew?
They were
I
Midianite.
guess
Midianite. Yeah. So they would have been distant relatives. The Midianites were, I think, descended from Ishmael. So if you go back to Abraham and then work from there. They were a Semitic people, but they weren't in the direct line with Isaac and Jacob. Boaz.
Ruth. So
Yeah,
Naomi told Ruth what to do.
So Naomi she wasn't really arranging the marriage. She didn't go to Boaz, right, and set
Right.
this up.
But
It
she
was
told
more,
Ruth.
she was do this, do this, do
Yeah.
this. She was a co-conspirator. And for Boaz, I mean, in a large way, God just sent, he was not looking, right? God sent Ruth to the door almost. Huge age, there was big age difference. Did it work?
Yeah.
Yeah, very well, it would appear. Boaz was a man of high character. Ruth was a young lady of high character. Again, you had the cultural difference between them, but Ruth, in her time with the family in her first marriage, which had ended with her being a widow, had adopted the faith of the Israelites. The Moabites were, again, distant relatives of the Israelites through Lot. So, David?
Saul's daughter.
So actually,
That was his first wife,
Lots of
anyway.
them.
he has 4 wives. So I think Michael is his first. That's the boss, the king, arranging that one. How did that one go?
Yeah,
Not so good. She thought he was some zealot. And then he marries Abigail, who was married to a man named Nabal, who was a selfish jerk. And David is ready to kill Nabal for not helping him and his men in their time of need. She actually goes to plead for her husband, kind of shows her good character, and talks David out of killing her husband. And then her husband gets knocked off just on his, it was just a matter of time. And then David had been so impressed with Abigail that he married her. While he was still officially married to Michael, it would appear that they were separated, so to speak. And some of those Old Testament people not being really clear always on polygamy, he took Abigail also. And then
Bathsheba.
course, Bathsheba, not to be recommended. And yet, it's the fruit of that marriage that provides Solomon not only the heir to the throne, but the line of the Savior.
Right.
And it would appear that they got along reasonably well. David was a man after the Lord's own heart, but that doesn't mean that he was either a good husband or a good father. He was pretty incompetent at both those things. And that's maybe not unusual for men of high standing very often. They are so about their work, they are so about their responsibilities that the family suffers. Careful what you ask for if you're looking for a man of wealth and influence. You might get more than you bargained for, not in a good way. Solomon.
700 wives.
What not to do?
Right.
So what was the basis in which Solomon married women? Plural.
They were female?
Well, they're female, yeah. So he's got that right, you know. Give him that.
Yeah. It was like a
700.
peace and power expansion operation, basically. I mean,
So his marriages were political.
yeah.
In a way, even if you go back to Joseph or some of the others on the list, in a way that goes beyond them even. So his wives were sort of the signature on the contract for the alliance that he's forming with this country or that country or that country. That seemed to be how he went about it. You don't get the impression there could have been much love in any of those marriages. They served a purpose. Doesn't seem to be any purposes that most people historically have thought of behind the marriages, right? And then he had 300 concubines besides the 900 wives, you know.
Well, he was just helping them out, right? I mean, there were poor women.
Yeah, right.
He had money.
Do you see us glaring at you?
There's some truth to that, right? I mean,
Well, okay, so
There is some truth
so
to
in
that.
his mind, might he have thought that way? That's very possible. Polygamy is still practiced in some places today. One TV show, which I think is coming to an end because the whole thing is broken up finally. But I think if you talk to the men who do it, they're not out to hurt people. That doesn't mean they don't hurt people, but that they don't say, I'm going to mess up 4 women's lives by making them all be my wife, you know, or making them all live, you know, try to figure that out. So they don't set out that way. An interesting thing is when we've done mission work in Africa, for example, we've had to figure out what do you do with these families where the chief has multiple wives, maybe some other men of influence. So now they become Christian and they want to follow Jesus. What are you going to do? Well, on the one hand, it's the biblical principle of one man, one woman is very clear. It's right at the essence of what marriage is all about. So you can't get around that. But because you're dealing with the cultural issues, if he was simply to say, well, the first wife is my wife and everybody else has to leave the household, they're probably going to starve to death. It's a culture where there's no jobs for women like the society that we've established. So what are you going to do? And I remember having a conversation about this with a man years ago. When you were in the preschool PTA, we hosted something at our house, and it was one of the other families, and it was a husband and wife who grew up in a mission field with another church body. And in that case, their missionaries just said, well, we'll try to, as the generations go, we'll try to change people's minds about this, but the chief or whomever will continue to have this many wives, etc. And that's what they did. What our missionaries have done is said, okay, you've got to have your one wife, but you're going to have to support these women without the husband-wife relationship for the rest of their lives. Right? So you're going to have to provide for them, but you can't continue to have a sexual relationship with them. That's only for your wife. Ahasuerus, Xerxes. You know who that is? Who's Ahasuerus' wife?
Esther.
Esther. How do they get hooked up?
A beauty queen contest.
Beauty contest, yeah. About as close as a bachelor, bachelorette kind of approach to things. You know, we're going to have a contest. We'll line up all the most beautiful women in the kingdom. We will apply all the beauty treatments to them for however much time. And the king will give his golden rose to the one he picks at the end. For the time, it might not have been a horrible marriage. Again, I don't know that there was a whole lot of love. Esther was well supported. She saved her people by being in that position. The king favored her. So, but probably like most despots and tyrants and dictators of ancient times, the wife was just kind of a tool. Provide me an heir, otherwise leave me alone. Right. Even she had to worry about coming into the throne room on pain of death without being invited. Basically treated like a servant. Better than starving to death, perhaps, but... all right, any lessons for us?
Past complications.
Well, if God isn't part of that, there's probably gonna be trouble.
Okay.
Seems to be the least complicated.
What was that?
If God is not a part of
Yeah.
the relationships, there's going to be potential for some heartache and some troubles, right?
It looks like the West is like
Even if God is part of the...
Yeah.
There's always that potential. It's still sinners we're bringing together.
Solomon ended up saying, just obey God. You know, do what God says, because it seems like he had a lot of trouble with all those women.
If you read the book of Ecclesiastes, you will get the impression that after running this experiment, he did learn some lessons at the end, right?
Women in trouble.
Couldn't go back and undo it necessarily, but he could give future generations some advice about it. And when you read the book of Proverbs also with his advice to his son, there's some good advice in there. So, you know, there's two ways to learn a lesson.
Was that the one where you live on top of the house or something?
Better to live on a corner of a roof than with a, I don't know, essentially, yes, yeah. Or like a constant dripping is a woman who doesn't stop nagging you or that kind of thing, right? So he certainly, you know, you can learn by having been taught, listening to your parents and teachers and applying it in your life. Or you can learn in the school of experience. And it is a very effective teacher. But those are some hard lessons. Okay. But you will probably learn in the end. And so you've got that with Solomon. Notice that there's a lot of different ways in which those people got into their marriages. And many of them are different than how we did. Some of them are more similar, some of them are less similar. But it's not necessarily a predictor all by itself of how the relationship turns out, of how close they are. Even if it were to be an arranged marriage where you had not that much say, you can, you know, I think when it comes to this, all of a sudden we decide, you know, we're in favor of this idea that human beings have free will and that we can choose. And then if we didn't get to choose on this, suddenly we decide that we maybe just turn that off. I can't actually just choose to love this person that I've been lined up with. Or maybe you can. And maybe just as your love grew in the dating and courting process that most of us are familiar with, if it was arranged, you could have your love grow and your lives bound together after already being committed, right? There's nothing to say that can't happen if you choose to make it happen. Because God gave you your own will. You can choose to make it work. It takes two. Right? So the person on the other side has to be cooperating, but that can happen. So the way in which you got into your marriage, and if we got into the details of how we met, it would be different for all of us. Robin and I met when She was dating my best friend.
Sounds so good.
We didn't start dating till some years after that. And about the same time, I was actually dating her roommate.
See,
That's funny.
But then there was a few other people in between before we ended up with each other. That was early high school and not so serious. But we were both far away from our parents. Our parents had little to do with it other than to get reports from us as to how things were going. And then I wanted to wait longer to get married than she probably was planning originally, because I thought it would be hard to go to school and support a family at the same time. But it's a long way when you've got 4 years of seminary after 4 years of college to get to that far end. And eventually we got there. I think you were at a football game. It was my aunt or my mom who apologized to you during college that I was taking so long. And we didn't wait to the very end. We managed the school and support the family at the same time. But I'm going to guess that's quite different than your stories. And like I said, I know any number of people they maybe didn't think of it as an arranged marriage because they didn't go to ask to have it arranged, but essentially it was. They got these people together. Vilas Gillespie, I might have told you the story. He was our district president when I came into the district. He used to tell his confirmation classes that as their pastor, he had gotten to know them very well, and he had them in class now, and he got a pretty personal relationship with them. And that he could do a better job of matching them up than they could do themselves. And if anybody wanted, he would do that. Now, I love Vilas Gillespie. He's been a mentor to me in my ministry. I think that's a fairly foolish thing for a pastor to offer. I don't want that responsibility because I don't want them coming back on me after the wedding and saying, "Man, you messed this up." However, he said nobody ever took him up on it. But there is some advantage in having people on the outside who see things that you're not seeing because you're so starstruck. And they can give you some advice and help along the way. But there are any number of people that it's been kind of arranged. And some people seeking that kind of thing with the internet sites or these high dollar matchmaking services, again, that I read when I'm on the airplane in the flight magazines. So different ways. None of that is to the essence of what makes the marriage real and how long it lasts. So, React. This is the author here. I'm a complete failure at modern romantic love-sustaining relationships. And he's not lying. If you've read the book, he's on his third marriage. He's not defending the two failures, but he is on his third marriage. And I hope you'll join me in being a blessed failure, not on the multiple marriages. That's not what he's saying. But in achieving this cultural goal that so many have. Because in this failed state, we begin to realize that the wedded union of man and woman, two people who are lifelong, self-absorbed, self-centered sinners, will be unsustainable apart from Christ's grace, his work, his protection, and his forgiveness. So I put react there. What do you think about that statement?
Absolutely.
Especially the last.
It's true.
That's true.
Anybody take any issue with anything he writes there? So just let me throw this out there. Do you know how atheists who get married, how the longevity of their marriages compares to Christians who get married?
Probably better for some reason.
That's what I would say.
It's about the same. And sometimes statistically a little better. But they don't have Christ's grace, Christ's work, Christ's protection, or Christ's forgiveness involved. What's up with that?
You don't feel a need to have it, I guess.
Apparently, yeah.
You can still be committed to something, whether it's
Okay.
religious or not religious.
Okay. Will Christ's grace, Christ's work, Christ's protection, and Christ's forgiveness be of great assistance in sustaining your marriage?
Yes.
Yes.
just because you're a Christian, does that mean that you are automatically going to make use of Christ's grace, Christ's work, Christ's protection, and Christ's forgiveness for your marriage? No. There are a lot of people who are genuinely Christians, but they haven't really figured this part out yet. And in our culture, so often, they have adopted so much of the world into their way of thinking. It doesn't mean they're not legitimate Christians. The Bible is full of characters just like that. We just looked at a whole list of them, right? They weren't particularly good husbands. The wives, on the other hand, weren't always particularly good wives. They had their issues. But, so he's right in saying that those things, especially for a Christian, are going to be at the center. But you might sometimes have two people who just happen to be so compatible. Just the right mix of the same in the right areas and yet complementary and different in the right areas. It'd be hard to make that not work. That may be. But at least it's true so far as to say that to have that assistance of a shared faith and the things that come with it and actively applying it, that is certainly helpful. So that would be the one caveat I would say there, because you all know people who were sincere Christians and they didn't stop being sincere Christians, but they really struggled with the marriage side of it. It's not love that sustains our marriage, it is marriage that sustains our love.
Contact and love.
Do you agree?
Yes.
Or do you have a comment?
Well, what
So
love-
Dar, you're kind of
Yeah, me too.
not so sure what you think of that.
What do you think about it?
Too
Marriage that
philosophical for
sustains
me.
God.
It didn't say God.
Is it kind
Yeah,
of
but
like
God
sometimes
is
you get
love.
upset with your spouse? I mean, we have been married the least amount of time of anybody, I think, in this room. So, you're unhappy with them, but you are married to them and this is your partner and you love them because of, I don't know, like you're committed to it, so.
Okay,
like,
yeah. So I think someplace in the book, and I didn't put the quote up there, he talks about how there are cases where if the kinds of problems that you weather in your marriage had come up while you were dating, you would have been out of there.
Yeah.
But because you're married, there is that extra level of, okay, there's a commitment that's been established, an expectation there. You work at it, even though if you didn't have the marriage, you maybe would have said, this is enough. I'm done. The other part of that, I think, is how we define.
That's what I was gonna say.
God.
Is it God or is it
Yeah, it's-
agape? Is it?
So you've been in enough Bible classes to know that the two big biblical words for love, the philos, which is like Philadelphia, it's the friendship kind of love. It's an affectionate kind of love that loves because you have some things in common and that you particularly appreciate in the other person. And there is a certain amount of mixing. They're not always so carefully distinguished, even in their biblical use. But agape love, that's the kind of love you have in John 3:16. It's consistently used for the kind of love that God has for people, in that there's not a whole lot attractive about us, spiritually speaking, but he chooses to love us anyway. And neither one of those, frankly, is the Greek word for romantic love, which they had a concept of, which is the word from which we get our word erotic. And it doesn't have the lower, seedy kind of understandings in the Greek. It's just kind of what we would think of as a rust, but it's that powerful, infatuated, setting your heart on somebody. And that's not in view here at all. So it's not, but he's kind of played on both sides of this a little bit. It's not romantic love. It's not romance that sustains our marriage. It doesn't hurt. Gentlemen, it will probably go a long way towards making your life better.
Keeper.
But it is marriage that sustains our love and that leads us towards a deeper, more stable, committed, lifelong love. And if because of that commitment is a part of it, goes a long way. All right, so that's kind of the introductory part of this. Do I have a? It's supposed to be done in 2 minutes, right? Anybody want to talk about anything you saw here in the introduction?
Cocaine. Let's talk about cocaine.
Some of you, so you're reading the book, right, or have?
Yeah.
Read
Yeah,
it?
we read it.
Yeah. Okay. You've been reading it. Okay. So, what's the connection?
Addiction.
Not addiction,
Well, you get that initial.
You- but the connection that authors make. Dopamine.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. You know what dopamine is? So dopamine is the pleasure hormone that's released when you do things that you like. It's a very strong reinforcer. So if there's an addictive drug you take, and particularly stimulants, it will stimulate you and you'll get a hit of dopamine. It's one of the things they say is such a big problem today with social media, that you get these little dopamine hits from getting a bunch of likes to your post or what have you, and it actually creates in your body craves more and more and more and more of those, and that becomes problematic. But dopamine is also highly involved in what we think of as romantic love, or that initial infatuation. The fact that when that other person is expressing not just a Facebook like, right, but they're showing you affection and such, you get a dopamine hit out of that. And God uses that to bring people together initially. But it's not going to be the kind of thing that's going to give our marriages legs to last. So that's what we'll get into next time. We'll look at some scripture with that also, understanding biblical definitions of love and expectations of love. But all right.
If your marriage goal is to fulfill your vows, I think a lot of people forget, it's like,
So one of the things I'm going to have in this section is we're going to look at the traditional marriage vows, which are far more sobering than I think most people understand when they're saying them.
Well, till death do you part.
Well,
That's
I
pretty
mean, yeah,
simple.
we go all the way to death with it, right? But I mean, to have and to hold, to love and to cherish, in sickness, in health, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. And the young couples are saying, yeah, get to the good parts, right? Not even, there's a reason why those were written that way. Millennia of experience. And are you in for it? Are you up for it? All right, so, yeah, but we'll actually walk through that in a little bit more detail when we get there. All right.